Hi, everyone. It's Monday, May 16th, 2016 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Admissions Live. I'm your host, Nicole Lentine, and on today's live broadcast, we're talking about competency-based education systems. Education is constantly shifting to best meet the needs of students and their future paths. One of the recent shifts that a significant number of high schools across the U.S. are making is a movement towards competency-based assessment and grading systems. Within a competency-based education system, learners advance through content or earn credit based on demonstration of proficiency of competencies. Depending on the institution, this may drastically change the grading system and transcript information from what many admissions offices are accustomed to, thus impacting a significant amount of processes across the admissions and financial aid review process. I'm excited to speak with Mike Stefanowicz, the newly appointed Director of Admission at St. Michael's College, about this topic today. But first, let's give a shout out to the sponsors that make today's broadcast possible. Admissions Live is part of the HigherEdLive network, offering viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Live webcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. Today's live viewing experience is powered by Maestro, the premier marketing tech platform for broadcasters. All episodes of Admissions Live are free and accessible in the video archives at higheredlive.com and in podcast format on iTunes. Today's episode is made possible by Chegg Enrollment Services. Chegg has two great webinars coming up to help you focus on important summer goals. On May 17th, Chegg will present their webinar on bridging your enrollment gaps. How do enrollment managers find that balance between long-term strategy and just bringing in their class? This webinar will provide some insights and suggestions for bridging short-term enrollment gaps while not sacrificing long-term strategic planning. On May 19th, Chegg presents their webinar on building your transfer outreach action plan. As we enter the spring recruitment season, when transfer recruitment becomes a big priority for many schools, it's important to stay informed of top trends and resources for building your brand, capturing student interest, and engaging and converting prospects through enrollment. This presentation will focus on top ways colleges are using new technology to go beyond the table in the student lounge and focus on high impact and measurable methods of finding and connecting with their prospects. And we've tweeted about both of those webinars from the HigherEdLive handle. HigherEdLive is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. HigherEdLive is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education. Just repeated myself. Calling all marketers and storytellers. M. Stoner is offering a free webinar on May 25th on storytelling to recruit students. Led by CEO and co-founder Voltaire Moran, this session explores stories that resonate with prospective students and their influencers. Using an undergraduate admissions experience map as our guide, we'll review 3 examples of stories targeted specifically towards different stages in the admissions process. Registration is free, and we're tweeting out a link where you can sign up. So without further ado, I'm very excited to welcome Mike Stefanowicz. He is from a college just down the road from Champlain, and he is the incoming Director of Admission at St. Michael's College in Colchester, Vermont. He has worked in the admissions field for 7 years and currently serves as the president of the Consortium of Vermont Colleges. Holding a Master's of Education in School Leadership, Mike has worked closely with high schools around New England on competency-based learning and the intersections between high school pedagogy and the college application process. Mike lives in Jericho, Vermont with his wife, Nicole, and their rescue dog, Isla. So, hi, Mike. Welcome to the show.
Hey there. Thanks very much, Nicole. Happy to be here.
I'm very excited to have you here, and it feels strange that we're from schools that are just down the road from each other, but I'm actually broadcasting today from Massachusetts, so we're still, thank goodness for the power of technology to connect us today.
Absolutely.
And before we get started, I just want to remind anyone who's viewing the show today that if you have questions for Mike and questions to ask throughout the show, don't forget to use the HigherEdLive hashtag, and I will keep an eye on Twitter and make sure that we address those questions. I know there's a lot of questions out there in the admissions world about this, and I hope that some school counselor viewers are joining us too. You may have some insight to share or some questions yourself, so please feel free to send those our way. But I am excited to turn it over to Mike to ask my first question, which is, give me a big picture, Mike. What is competency-based learning?
Absolutely. Well, competency-based learning or standards-based learning, I think folks tend to use those terms interchangeably. It's a whole system of pedagogy that's really taking lift in the K-12 world, including instruction, assessment, grading, the reporting that we see in the college admission process. It's really all tied together, and it's considered a best practice in modern education. Now, K-12 schools have had standards for a while now. And they've taken a bunch of different forms. Most states had written their own, and at least for English language arts and mathematics, they're using the Common Core. There's next generation science standards. There's a whole bunch of different commonly accepted standards. And they articulate at each grade level what a student should be able to know, understand, and do. So in my other screen here, I actually pulled up the Common Core website. And just to give you a sense of one standard, this is from the English Language Arts Standards for Literacy, grades 11 and 12, the students who we're often working with in the admission process, where the expectation is to write arguments to support claims in an analysis of substantive topics or texts using valid reasoning and relevant and sufficient evidence.
Awesome.
So that's a pretty clear, this is what a high school student should be able to do. And standards-based learning puts those standards at the forefront of everyone's work. They're clearly articulated for students, teachers, and parents, and they all know what academic mastery looks like. It's not passing English 11, it's writing that argument to support your claims with all of the different features that are embedded in the language of the standard. Now, teachers are supposed to break those down into more manageable steps called learning targets and use rubrics so that students know exactly how their work qualities match up with what the standard is asking of them.
Cool. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, I think that's one great example. Are there any more kind of big concrete examples that stand out to you that really shows the difference between kind of competency and standards-based learning and more traditional schooling, as a lot of others may be more accustomed to?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you a story actually from my own school experience. I remember taking spelling tests in the 3rd grade, and perhaps some of the folks who are dialed in have done the same thing. There would be maybe 20 words on the test. Each of them were worth 5 points apiece. And our spelling tests, I remember, always had some coloring picture. So if it was the fall, we'd have to color in some kind of leaves or cornucopia or something seasonal. And I remember going on vacation when I was in 3rd grade to Disney World, and I was going to miss a week of school. My mom called up the teacher, got all the work I was going to be missing, actually gave me the spelling test at home. I was always pretty good at spelling, so I actually got all the answers right on that test. And then I got the test back, and the teacher hadn't given me 100 because I hadn't colored in the picture. And, that's a perfect example where, if the end product that we're looking for is a specific grade in spelling class, that's what traditional schooling looks like. If we're looking at standards-based learning, we're assessing, does Mike know how to spell these 20 words to meet a specific standard? Mm-hmm. And I bet everybody has, those kind of silly stories from their grade school or high school experience where, what the work product didn't actually align up with what the purpose of the learning was. I'll give you another example. So let's say you have a high school student who's taking a math class, and in quarter 1, the student earns an A+. Quarter 2, he gets a B+. Quarter C, he gets a C+. Quarter D, he gets a D+. Now, at the end of the year, there's a B- on that transcript for the student. And those of us who are looking at a student's admission portfolio are seeing that B- in whatever that math course was. As an average, it would suggest that that student did okay in their math class. But that's a year where he missed the whole last half of the year's worth of content. Let's suppose there was a different math concept or math standard each quarter. He didn't learn adequately for half the year and didn't demonstrate any academic mastery. Standards-based learning would report out, these are the 4 standards you're working on, and you need to show mastery of each one if you're going to go ahead and pass this math class as a whole. There's a couple other qualities that really mark the mindset shift for both teachers, families, and students. And it's a big mindset shift. It's getting completely around what we're used to. Teachers would be grading students solely on their academic mastery of the standards. That means things like effort, homework, how well you behave in class, attendance aren't things that are factored into an academic grade. And I would argue that that's a good thing, because that is information that's kind of befuddled actually knowing whether a student's gotten academic mastery. Students have as many tries as necessary to demonstrate their learning. So they can meet the standard on the first try, or if it's something they're practicing all year, they still meet that standard and get the good grade at the end. Instead of that student brushing off the quarter 3 C+ that he earned in my earlier example because he has an acceptable average, teachers would have it on their list of duties to keep engaging that student all the way through that full course worth of content. And because teachers are creating rubrics, the criteria would be really clear to students and straightforward, and everybody would be speaking the same language right from the beginning. So it really emphasizes that back and forth conversation between students and teachers about their work quality. Finally, I think when it's implemented well, and I've seen this in a couple of schools that have really taken it and run with it, it changes the conversation among students from, oh, I got a C on this assignment, or what grade did you earn, to, my work approaches the standard, and what do you need to do to really bring that up? What does my work quality need to look like?
That's a really great point, and I feel like it takes a lot of the guesswork out for students when it's very explicitly clear. These are the standards I've met. These are the standards I still have yet to meet. What can I do to better myself to make sure I'm more aligned to understand this content in the class and be able to be prepared for the following year?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, those are some great examples, and you made me kind of chuckle because I definitely remember the coloring pages on my my spelling test too. So thank you for bringing that back to my memory. Yes, I'm still kicking around here somewhere. I should go look for those before I head back home. So, we, of course, are doing this on Admissions Live, and so my big kind of question and thing I'm working through myself as an admissions counselor, and I know that you are and others out there are, what impact is the shift going to make on the way we review applications, especially with, I think we'll talk about it a little bit later too, but the way that, transcripts might start looking different. They already have, and, this might kind of shift our understanding of how students are prepared for us to come in. So can you speak to some of the ways that you've already seen impacts on the way you review applications and things you're thinking about down the road too?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we review an application, and when schools are making the shift to competency-based grading, standards-based grading, the college admission process is also the biggest question mark for families. So not only the viewers of Admission Live, but families, as they're going through those info sessions and the principals standing up and saying, hey, the state of Vermont is mandating this, the state of Maine is mandating this, or my school district is moving this direction. They want to know that their kids aren't going to be put at a disadvantage in the college admission process. And at St. Michael's, and I think a lot of places around the country, we use territory management for our approach to admission recruitment and application review. And that means that the same admission counselor who's showing up at a high school in the fall is going to be the person who's the first reader on that student's application come wintertime. And it means that we know our high schools. You and I have some of the same travel areas. And it means that when we're in one of those New Hampshire schools, we know what the courses mean. We know what some of the grading idiosyncrasies are. And if it's a feeder high school in my territory, I'll often read that whole batch of applications in one morning or one afternoon. So I really get my head around how things work there. And that's not something that's going to really shift in this model. High schools are still going to present information in a variety of different formats when they have transcripts. And we're still going to be able to make effective admission decisions because we're getting into what that comparison is in that school group. On some competency-based transcripts, you might get more detail about a student's academic achievement, simply because you have some of those attendance, effort sort of grades removed, and you're really getting a sense of how they are demonstrating what they know, understand, and can do in relation to those academic standards. And that the courses are built with that in mind when they're reporting out a grade. In some high schools, you also might see a habits of learning grade that's directly next to an academic achievement grade, and I really find that to be valuable information. One school that does that that jumps right out to me is Tilton School, which is a boarding school in New Hampshire, and they've done that for a couple of years now. And it's always interesting to see the correlation or not between academic achievement and what kind of habits a student is bringing to class. And if you want to see some of the ways that high schools are being coached on how to form their transcripts, the Great Schools Partnership in Maine is a great resource that both high schools and college admission counselors can go on and look through their pedagogy and their reporting resources. Let's see. So, I would say that habits of learning grade, I like it separated when I read an application. As an admission officer, I think that's valuable information. College is an environment where students are coming, they have a lot of freedom. If we all could feel a little bit more secure in knowing if I'm taking a chance on a student, there's somebody who knows how to use their time well and reach out for appropriate help, how much more confidence does that give us in the admission process? I think it's great. And I think reference letters take on a new level of importance too in terms of describing a student's habits of learning, and if that doesn't show up on the transcript, I'm going to want a lot of good detail in the reference letter to complement the academic achievement info on the transcript.
That's a really great insight. And I'm even thinking of, I'm quite a few years deep into the admissions process, and I know we've all seen that letter that, or that essay where a student is talking about, the information was too easy for me, and as a result I didn't get a high grade because I got bored. And I think that this breaking down of kind of the habits that the students developed, and sometimes there's a breakout of sort of not effort, but kind of, well, I guess effort is a fair word put towards it. A lot of these things can help to sort of break down what that day-to-day experience is like for a student, and it gives us a better sense on the admissions end of, is the student going to be the right match for who we are as an institution? So I agree with you. Yeah, I really like the way that that's broken down. Do you feel like it's really brought the value of interviews a little bit more to the forefront, or do you feel like you gain a lot of that perspective from the academic piece now?
I think we still gain a lot of that perspective from the academic piece, the transcript, the reference letters. We don't do evaluative interviews at St. Mike's, but if I was a college that did do evaluative interviews, I think that would be another piece that I'd want to hear in the students' own words what they experience.
Definitely.
But I really like your point about that student that is too high flying to put forth the effort. And just kind of thinking about that, I have a number of friends who are teachers, and when they describe this style of learning looking, as it should at the high school level, I go back to that example standard, writing arguments to support claims. You could have a whole class of kids doing that and being on different levels. And the students that have really mastered that already might get more advanced text to work with, or more advanced claims that they need to defend. So I think this isn't just about moving the students who are struggling up, although it does do wonders for that. But it's about taking students at all different levels and challenging them in a way that's sort of customized, because good teaching involves individual relationships with students.
That's so true. And I'm thinking even of, I don't know how often I've shared this background on HigherEdLive, but I was an elementary education major myself, and we learned to write lesson plans to a particular a standard or a few standards, and it was explicitly clear. It kind of held you to a teaching standard, really, to not just put together a lesson plan like, oh, this seems like something that would be fun today, but it really explicitly was trying to achieve a goal for those students and to be able to help them go down that path. And if you knew you had students who were stronger, or not stronger, but maybe had different skill set than other students, you were able to kind of think carefully about what accommodations can I make for students for whom this might be a struggle, and what accommodations can I make for students who are going to fly through this in 10 minutes? What is something else that I can put in place that they're still achieving that standard, but they're getting a higher level of difficulty that can actually move them towards maybe a higher level within this standard that can help them down the road. So I like that it really helps faculty in a really great way to be able to help their students achieve goals, to be able to be stronger as students.
Right, so, for sure.
It's fun to look at the educational background of it, along with, just students complaining about things that they need to do in the classroom, being able to say, well, this is why you're doing what you're doing. And actually, I'm going to spring a question I didn't prepare you with, Mike, but St. Mike's are you guys test optional?
We are test optional, yes.
Have you seen an impact from this standard of learning within the context of not depending as much on test scores? And do you find you're using this a little bit differently?
I think we're at the point right now where the majority of our transcripts are still coming through in a traditional way. So we're trying to be a little bit ahead of the curve and study this trend. And we see it happening in Maine. We see it happening in Vermont, pockets of New Hampshire, definitely some states out in the Midwest are implementing this, but my expertise is mostly in the New England states. So we're preparing for this, but at this point we haven't gotten to that place of what's the role of the standardized test. I think the challenging thing isn't so much with the admission process, because based on this information, we're going to be able to make an effective admission decision and say that someone has what it takes to be successful in our academic environment. But in the financial aid process, most of our financial aid models run on some sort of numbers. Plenty of places that are adopting standards-based learning and standards-based grading still will report out a GPA or a rank in class. Although if you got into the real pure pedagogy of it, that isn't something that would be incorporated. So to not have rank or not have GPA or standardized tests because you're test optional could make financial aid merit packaging a little trickier. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we are advising is if you don't have either of those things, it's good to submit test scores. But we also use a rubric when we make our admission evaluations here. And that's something that we did when we went test optional so that we could be really fair and consistent with folks. So we have an equal part weighted rubric looking at academic performance, strength of the high school schedule, quality of the writing, personal goals and extracurricular and co-curricular involvement, and then also how a student hits our enrollment goals. And so by using that rubric, I think that allows us to be pretty fair and consistent. And I could see that rubric score driving a piece of the merit formula if we didn't have any of those other numeric values.
That's really great that you're doing that. And you jumped right ahead to a question I was about to ask you. So kudos to you. But yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think maybe a lot of colleges are still grappling with how does this change our vote sheet? How does this change our review process? You're absolutely right. I think it impacts financial aid massively and almost, maybe not more than admissions, but admissions, it's a little bit more, there's a little bit more subjectivity to it, I guess. There's other factors that financial aid is typically dependent on numbers. And so I like that you have a rubric to still be able to give sort of a balance across the way. And sort of leads me into another question, I guess, that, when you're looking at, of course, we review students individually, and we're looking at individual files on a case-by-case basis of how does the student match our institution, how would they fare at our institution. But when you're looking at a broad full class and their academic abilities, how that class looks like when you have some that have traditional grading, kind of traditional scores that we've been used to seeing, and some are competency-based. I mean, do you find that's even an issue that you struggle with? Moving into your role as director of admission, do you foresee any kind of struggle with that, or how are you feeling about looking at that on a full class basis?
I think that's always the most challenging piece, and it's one that it was an imperfect system before standards-based grading came onto the scene, and as high schools adopted, it's still going to be an imperfect system because high schools all have a different grading scale. You just think about the schools that report out weighted versus unweighted GPAs that are grades out of 100, grades out of A, B, C, D. I've seen 4.0 scales. I've seen 7.0 scales. It's that fine mix of art and science and professional judgment for admission staff. I think the territory management is still a big piece there because the best way that we can compare students to each other just to make sure that admission decisions make sense is by looking at individual school groups. When you have singleton, ones and twos sort of students from places where we don't get applications often, that becomes a little bit more challenging. But still we have, the profile really key for helping us to unpack an application. And that kind of, it launches into one other point that, I did hope to make at some point through this, is the importance of the high school profile. As colleges are getting applications and high schools are changing their systems to communicate that really well on the admissions profile that goes attached to every transcript, I think I can't underestimate the importance of that. And for high schools, you said that there might be some high school counselors tuning into this. I've always been happy to give feedback on profiles. There's a few schools here in Vermont where I've presented on this at different conferences, and they've sent me their profile. Here's what we're thinking. Is this enough information? That partnership between the high school side and the college admissions side is really key to making sure that that information flow is going in a successful way.
I absolutely agree. Oh, don't mind the phone ringing in the background here. And I really like the point that you make, that it's so important for this open communication, because I was chuckling over here when you were talking about GPA scales, because I can think of at least one high school that does a 16 or 18.0 scale. So yeah, I think it's always been an adventure to try to get everybody on the same sort of playing field to try to do that. But I completely agree, and you kind of jumped into another question I was going to ask of how can high schools really help us as admissions offices to understand this and to be able to do this in a way that is fair to the students, and to be able to really honor the work that they've put forth and with the learning that they've done, and how far they've come. And I agree, profiles are huge in that, just open dialogue, communication. I think it's a really great thing. I've shouted it out a few times on this show, but if you're not already a member of College Admission Counselors, it is a massive Facebook group that there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of conversation. It's usually very civil, but there's some heated debates that happen in there. But I think it's a great place to also be able to have these conversations and help us all understand each other, because we're all in the same industry and the same goal of helping students to go on to post-secondary education and to be in the right place that is going to benefit them. So I agree that open dialogue is so important. Beyond the profiles and open conversation, I mean, is there anything else? I mean, is there anything they could add to the transcripts? Is there anything else they should be doing, or do you think that's going to achieve that goal?
Well, I think the other big thing that jumps out at me is the importance of describing learning targets that would go along with these standards. If a school opts to make a transcript that really lists standards or lists in an unconventional way how students have met academic requirements, I can think of a number of colleges and universities that have some pretty traditional prerequisites that are credit-based. There's a college around us who requires chemistry if you want to get into their nursing major. And let's say a student has met the chemistry standards, but their transcript isn't going to say junior year chemistry B+. I would want some really detailed information on that admission application about what the learning targets were for the chemistry abilities and skills that a student's garnished, so that they don't lose an opportunity there. And those colleges that have a lot of those very specific prereqs, they tend to be scientific or technical or fine arts oriented. And to give more detail than less on a student's admission documents is really important. The other piece that it makes me think about, and I know it's a heated and complex topic, but the whole coalition application. Regardless of how you think the rollout has gone with that, I think it begs the question, can a portfolio be an admission application in any number of different forms? And I think that there's the potential that could happen. When you actually see student work and it's boiled down in a greatest hits sort of way, or a best of, so that it can still be reviewed efficiently. I'd like to see some colleges play with that. I think Marlborough College did an interesting job with that, with the dimensional application that they announced a few years ago, where they really let students put forward any sample of their best work and let that speak for who they are as a student. There's a number of colleges, I think Goucher did something related a few years before that really have have pushed the limits on what can count as an admission application.
That's a great point. And I'm really intrigued to see where there's companies like Zeme is the first one that jumps out at me, that it's built to be able to be a portfolio kind of, not even a portfolio, it's more than that. I mean, it's really kind of create your online kind of outline of yourself, you know, and who you are to present to colleges. So we're moving into this space that's really interesting with the way that media and past documents and other things that go beyond the typical just admissions documents to see what students are going to look like. So it's a fascinating world of being in admissions and seeing where this is all going. I'm really excited, but it's an adventure for sure. Is there any other information colleges could provide to high schools that you think would be helpful as far as how they'll review these applications, especially when it comes to competency or standards-based education?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is for colleges to be really clear about their admission criteria. The whole standards-based learning model comes out of that whole culture of transparency that seems to be permeating a lot of aspects of life right now. And colleges need to reciprocate that by saying this is the standard that students are being judged against when we assess their applications for admission. And I also think that we can do a very good job of reassuring families that admission applications, transcripts have always come from a number of different formats, and we've always been able to make effective admission decisions, and we're going to continue to do that. And to throw our support behind this, there's a lot of great educational research out there that shows that from low achieving to high achieving students, this method of pedagogy helps all students achieve more. And to throw our support behind that and say that we really think that there's value in how your high school is implementing this, if they're implementing it correctly, that can assuage a lot of worries from parents. Every time I hear a group speak about this, the number one worry on the part of parents and students is this going to disadvantage my kid in the college admission process?
That's a great point, and I do think it's hopefully a shift in the right direction of providing better access and really for helping support all students to be able to pursue the educational path that's right for them. It's really, really great insight. Nearing the last few questions, I want to remind viewers, if you have any questions for Mike or for myself, but mostly for Mike, you can use the hashtag HigherEdLive. I will make sure to ask them on air. Otherwise, Mike does not have a functioning Twitter, so I'm happy to connect you with him via email or another resource if you want to connect to them afterwards. But please feel free to tweet us questions if you have any, as we're going through the last few questions right now. So kind of these are starting to shift big picture. We've talked about admissions, we've talked about financial aid a little bit, and so what shifts, if any, do you hope to see in this era of this renewed kind of focus on, or not, this new focus on competency-based and standards-based grading? What are you hoping to see?
I think if high schools and K-12 schools, because it really does exist through that spectrum, roll this out well, I hope that some of the best practices really carry over into the world of college. I hope we're helping students to fashion their thinking at the K-12 level in a way that helps them have productive conversations about who they are as a learner that's best. I think about a faculty colleague and her own child who went through college here at St. Mike's. And she was telling me this story of, having a professor give an assignment that really didn't have a lot of performance criteria. And she helped him kind of fashion the questions that he would go and ask that professor about what does it take to do a good job on this assignment? Not what does it take to get a good grade in your course, but how do I demonstrate my very best learning on this particular assignment? What does that look like? And if we're encouraging students to really develop that language at the high school level, of course they're going to come to college and ask their professors for rubrics, for performance criteria, for, why can't I retake this test, or why can't I make up this assignment now that I really have learned a little bit more? So for those pieces of this that really are educational best practice, I'm excited to see how and if they will shift into the college learning environment. And I think there's also a lot of technology that goes along with this, portfolios and the like, and to see some of those technology tools also permeate first the K-12 and then the college environment could be really exciting.
I like it. I'm really excited to see where this all takes us. I agree. I think I think this idea of education is an important one, and I feel like I've started to see it permeate our college environment a little bit, and I hope to continue to see it go down that path. So, thank you for that. And then, kind of a last big scope question, but we always shoot to make sure that the show can really help benefit admissions offices across the United States and the world. So what recommendations do you have for colleges that are still grappling with how to best assess these applications?
Well, speaking from our own experience at St. Mike's, that rubric has been a godsend in a number of different areas as we see changes in the way that transcripts are happening, changes in the way that standardized tests operate. Having that rubric with clear admission criteria that allows us to make consistent and holistic application decisions and all work from the same set of evaluation criteria has really just been great for St. Mike's. And for admission offices that are struggling with how they're going to assess this, I think sitting down to write out what that rubric is going to look like for your office is a valuable thing. It's one of those scenarios where we did the rubric and then we also used our old evaluation processes for a number of years concurrently so we could plug in the data and do that statistical analysis to say that this rubric really is measuring what it's supposed to measure. And if folks want to get into the weeds of how to do that, I'm happy to connect with them after this or point them in the direction of colleagues that really took the lead on that project here at St. Mike's. But I can't say enough good things about the rubric. The second thing that I think we need to do is really renew our commitment to working collaboratively with high school counselors. We're all in this for students' best interest. That's the counseling piece of our job. And so that open line of communication and that planning that happens in both directions and the communication that happens in both directions between school counselors and admission folks, I think this will be a nice avenue to keep that going.
I completely agree. And it's something I vouch for every darn episode, I think, is just let's have better communication with each other. Let's keep that dialogue open. I love the fact that you guys make a rubric and it sounds like you're so willing to share it with others. And I think that's huge. That's something I love about higher education, especially I feel like in admissions and in counseling, is we're so eager and excited to share with each other. We have NEACAC and other ACACs around the corner coming up this summer for annual meetings and conferences. And it's so great to see all the sessions that are out there that this works for us. This works for us. Let's talk about it. Let's help each other put this into our own work. So, and your willingness. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and actually, speaking of the NEACACs, the New England Association of College Admission Counseling, June 1st through 3rd in Boston, I'm going to be presenting on this topic again, but I'll have a couple people joining me. One of them is Patty Tomaschott, who's the Director of Student Services at Champlain Valley Union High School here in Vermont. And CVU is a high school that's done some really great work. They're a couple steps ahead of some of their peers because they took this as early adopters and really ran with it. So she would be a great person to connect with. We also have Greg Henderson, who's an assistant principal in Maine, talking about the experience that schools in Maine have had as they're adopting this, as well as Jesse Olson, who's the CEO of Jump Rope, which is a technology platform that allows teachers to track standards-based grades. So if you really want to get into some of the details of that, I'd love to welcome some new faces to our presentation.
Awesome. I hope a few viewers take advantage of that. That sounds like it's going to be a great session. I might have to check that out myself because I'm still trying to figure out how to wrap my brain around all this too. So thank you so much, Mike. Thanks for that plug at the end for NEACAC too. And like I said, I encourage any viewers, if you have any questions, I didn't see any pop up on the hashtag today, but if you have questions after you've gotten to view this in the archives or listen to the podcast, please feel free to reach out to myself. I'm at Lentine, Nlentine on Twitter, and I will direct them over to Mike. He's easy enough for me to catch and connect you with him. So thank you again, Mike, so much. This is a really fun topic to be able to talk about with you, and I am excited to see where things go over the next few years.
Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And thanks as always to our program sponsors, Chegg and M. Stoner. Tune in to Admissions Live on Monday, June 6th for our NACAC State of College Admissions broadcast with host Chris Dorso and guests from NACAC. And I will personally be back on June 20th. Stay up to date with upcoming episodes from Higher Ed Pros by subscribing to the newsletter at higheredlive.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.